Good afternoon, everybody. You're very welcome to the third of the Irish Planning Institute's Lunch and Learn CPD on MSP. As you can see, we have two speakers today. We have Rory O'Leary from Mara, and we have Juliet Fitzpatrick from the Department of Housing, Local Government and Heritage. That's a change to our schedule lined up because Conor McCabe from DEC was due to talk today, but he has done a swap with Juliet, and Conor will be making his presentation next week instead. The two speakers will, as before, each make a presentation of about 25 minutes, and we'll have time for a Q&A afterwards, and we aim to finish at 2:50. Once again, if you've got a question for either of our speakers, please pop your question into the chat box. Thank you very much for the feedback you've given us to date on the series. That's been very helpful to the committee, and we would appreciate if you would continue to give us some feedback. So our first speaker today is Rory O'Leary, who will give us an introduction to Mara. He's currently Head of Policy and Consenting with Mara, having previously led the Mara Establishment Unit in the Department of Housing, Local Government and Heritage. So, Rory, over to you.
Thank you very much for that intro, Terry. And I'm just going to share the screen here, and you can let me know when you see the slideshow popping up.
That's it, Rory. Yeah.
Great. That's great. Thanks, Emil. So thanks again, and for the introduction, and good afternoon, everybody. It's a great opportunity for me on behalf of Mara to introduce you, the audience today, to Mara. So look, over the next kind of 20 minutes or so, what I'd like to do is take the opportunity to give you an intro to Mara, kind of tell you how we came about, spend a little bit of time on that, who we are. I suppose really importantly then our role in the overall architecture of the marine planning system, how we contribute to that specifically, and I suppose maybe a little bit at the end around how we in Mara feel that we can be an enabler to maximise, I suppose, the potential of our huge maritime resource, adhering to the principles of obviously proper spatial planning and sustainable development. So in terms of where we came from, Mara, I suppose we don't exist in isolation. We are part of a broader picture of the reform of marine management in Ireland. I'll spend just a minute or two on the background and the context here, because we've come through, I suppose, a journey of really significant transformation in terms of our maritime planning and our maritime space, led by colleagues in the Department of Housing and other departments, but principally in the Department of Housing over the last number of years, right from 2014 with the introduction of the MSP directive, through to last year to the publication of the National Marine Planning Framework, which is the overarching plan for marine spatial planning, and then the enactment of the Maritime Area Planning Act, which effectively provided the establishing legislation for setting up Mara, and really, I suppose, transformed how we look at our marine spatial planning system. What we've done, I suppose, in that period of time, we look at 2021, we're in 2023 now, we're effectively reforming legislation that's the guts of 100 years old in terms of the Foreshore Act 1933, which previously had kind of governed how we would have planned for the maritime space. So there's been a huge amount of transformation and change in that. I won't go into all the details around the forward planning piece and the spatial planning that might come at a future iterations of this particular forum. So what I want to do is kind of focus on Mara's role in that. But before I can get into that, I do think it's important to give a little bit of that context. And this graphic here, which helpfully was created by colleagues in the department, just gives a snapshot really of what the marine planning system in Ireland is looking like now, and the various entities and actors in that. So we obviously have the planning authorities who have their key roles in terms of planning permission on board Planala, and obviously coastal planning authorities who also have an enforcement role. In the middle we have that, I suppose, future and forward planning piece, which can come about by a number of means, but principally through designated competent authorities who can kind of create sub-level marine spatial plans. And as I said, sitting in the middle of all of that is the marine planning policy statement, which is kind of a high level overarching piece, which is being developed as well, which will inform that. And probably, I suppose, and importantly for this presentation is ourselves here in Mara, and where we come out of. So I suppose when all of the discussion was around how we plan for a maritime area, I suppose it was felt that there was a need for maybe a coordination and a centralized approach to how we consent, and how we govern that. So out of that kind of discussion and maybe policy debate, Mara was born, and hence we have an agency, and our responsibility really is for consenting certain functions in the maritime area, which I'll get to through the course of the presentation, but also in terms of enforcement functions as well. And we have a role across those kind of key areas. So consenting, which are MACs and licenses, which I'll get to, and obviously enforcement as well. The bit that's not included on that slide, I suppose, is probably the added value piece that we see Mara playing, and I might speak to that a little bit as well. That's just by way of background and context, and there's a lot more detail one could go into in that, but we'll keep that for maybe future sessions. So who are we, or who we are, and about us a little bit. So Mara, we're a pretty new kid on the block in terms of agencies. We were established on the 17th of July this year. Our headquarters are here in Wexford. And we established in quite a quick piece of time, I suppose, from the passage of the legislation in a fairly short time frame, and that was really brought about by, I suppose, the political kind of desire to see the agency up and running, so it could kind of affect the change that we need to see in our planning system. So we kind of established on a kind of an accelerated path, which was pretty challenging in itself, but we did get there thanks to a lot of help and I suppose collaboration from various colleagues across the government system. We are similar to other state agencies in that we have a governance board. So our parent department, as we like to call them at this point, is the Department of Housing, Local Government and Heritage, but we also have obviously stakeholder input from wider government departments. We have a governance board, 11 members, with a chairperson, and I suppose the board is really important because they do set a policy direction for Mara. They have a role in terms of setting strategy, and I suppose holding the executive of Mara to account in terms of our delivery around our functions on a day-to-day basis. But it's important, I suppose, to state that the board don't have any role in decision making, and that's delegated to the executive. Again, importantly for a board, that it does have a very good balance and blend of skills and experience and competence, both from across the planning spectrum, environmental spectrum, legal and regulatory compliance, etc. So there's a really good blend and a good balance to that board. And the bios of the board members are actually on the Mara website. Our executive team is led by Laura Bryan, our CEO, and as I said, their decision making is at an exec level. So very briefly, in terms of our org structure, as we're trying to refine and build up and I suppose put our plan in place, it's not just building an agency to do the job that we're meant to do. We actually have to build our whole corporate spine as well. So we've set out kind of our high level org structure there in terms of our key divisions, ranging from our legal piece to the policy and consenting unit, which I head up, and again our assessment, research and data, which we think would be really important in terms of providing technical input. Tomorrow's role across there to our compliance, enforcement and revenue. So that's our high level org structure. Just getting into the more specifics of Mara's role in this slide here, we have a couple of pieces of new kind of terminology that we'll work through here. The maritime area consent. So on our consenting piece, we have two arms to our consenting role, effectively. The maritime area consent, the MAC for short, and the maritime usage license, which is licensable activity, and I'll go into those in a bit more detail. Really, we have a primary role to set about to manage the occupation of the maritime area. And what does that really mean? Well, if somebody wants to do something in the sea, they'll need a consent for it in certain places, in certain areas, and that's really where Mara steps in. So as part of that, it's not just about issuing the consents. We have to follow through on that to ensure that consent holders are compliant. And we have a key role then around the enforcement piece, that we see as being really important in terms of how we monitor compliance with our consents. I'll speak to that a little bit as well. We also have responsibility from Establishment Day for all of the existing foreshore authorizations that were granted by the Minister for Housing and various predecessors and iterations thereof under the Foreshore Act 1933. So we have legal responsibility for those. So what does that mean? It means effectively that Mara has kind of stepped into the role of the Minister in those consents, and the Minister has stepped out as of the 17th of July. Key piece here that I might touch on at the end of the presentation is around cooperation. So the legislation is kind of very helpfully written that it allows MARA to enter into cooperation agreements with other kind of regulators, other maritime users. And we see that as being really important to try to avoid, I suppose, duplication, perhaps reduce the regulatory burden, and to bring a consistency and a transparency, I think, to our usage around the maritime space. And that's a really important piece as we see things evolving for ourselves. All of our kind of legislative functions come from the MAP Act, including, I suppose, our jurisdiction. The couple of maps here just show, I suppose, at a high level, Ireland's kind of maritime space. You would have seen probably much better maps last week in Ali's presentation, so apologies if they're not up to scratch. But the red line there is obviously our delineation of our EEZ. You know, 7 times our land mass, so huge area. Mara's jurisdiction extends right out to that red line boundary. The map on the right hand side just shows, I suppose, the delineation a bit closer to shore. We have our 12 mile nautical limit. That was, I suppose, previously, and people would refer to that as being the limit of our foreshore. That was the limit that the Foreshore Act went to, was 12 nautical miles, but our jurisdiction extends beyond that. So I suppose in terminology changes, what we're evolving to is new terminology. We're kind of not quite turning our backs on foreshore terminology, but we're trying to adopt, I suppose, a new nomenclature in that respect in terms of the near shore and the outer maritime area. So what we're looking at here is anything out to the from that the blue line outwards is the outer maritime area, and anything from that blue line into shore is a near shore area. That's kind of to 3 nautical miles. The graphic here just kind of represents it slightly differently, but you'll get to see it in the same way. So we're not using the foreshore terminology in the same way. We're looking at near shore, outer maritime area. That's relevant because I'll get to that. It's relevant because it determines where planning permissions go. Effectively, that's why it's relevant. And obviously, there's a link back into the functional area. Everything that happens out at sea effectively comes ashore in some way, shape, or form, or at some point. And there's obviously a significant linkage here into the boundary areas of the local authorities, and there's a bit of work ongoing, I think, to map those boundary areas. But you just get a representation here, I suppose, of what the near shore might be and how that's relevant. This is relevant, obviously, as well for in terms of the near shore piece where you have overlapping applications that might traverse a local authority boundary. That dictates then where they travel in terms of the planning system. So that's why all of that is relevant in terms of the terminology. So that's probably maybe a key take home really for people is to is the familiarization with probably new terminology, new kind of terminology that we're using around the maritime area. Terminology that hasn't changed, I suppose, is what people will be familiar with in terms of when we're closer to land and the high water mark. Our jurisdiction starts at the high water mark and extends outwards, as I've said. And that high water mark is dictated by the older kind of OSI kind of historic 25-inch maps that frankly kind of are beyond my level of competence and expertise, I think. But I like to put up a picture to show what it kind of means, and I suppose it's maybe the line of the seaweed on the shore there in terms of the high water mark might come in, the discoloration piece on the top right. Importantly as well for people a bit more inland, that we have tidal estuaries and we have foreshore and maritime area that comes, you know, up quite a bit in terms of the Slaney here in Wexford is tidal up to kind of around Enniscorthy. So there will be maritime area that in places where that may not be overtly coastal initially. So the delineation is really important in terms of understanding the jurisdiction of MARA's role. So once we understand what we have, where we operate, it's kind of what we do in that space and how we can consent across it. So the main significant change around the maritime planning has reformed in a number of areas, but this maritime area consent and the concept of maritime area consent is hugely significant and it's quite different to anything we've had before. It's a new consent. It's a new legal construct that the state through MARA is awarding through a process to applicants effectively. It's a legal consent with conditions. It manages the relationship between the state and the holder of the MAC, and it just gives the holder a right to occupy part of the maritime area for a specific purpose and a specific duration. Okay, so what it isn't is a lease. It's not a lease that transfers a property right. We don't sell the seabed or the maritime area, and we don't transfer ownership of it to any entity. The state holds it through MARA effectively, and MARA gives the holder of that or the applicant the right to occupy that for a duration and a purpose. And that's a really important conceptual piece as well for both public and private authorities, for everybody to kind of understand. This is a really good way of managing our maritime resource. That the state retains control of it, subject to the conditions of the MAC. A MAC is required in advance of planning permission. So we call it a gateway to the planning system. So if any applicant wants to develop a project in the maritime area that requires planning consent, they require a MAC in advance of applying for planning permission. So that's a key kind of take-home message at this point. If there's no MAC, there's no right to occupy the maritime area. There should be no planning permission. It's effectively akin to the landowner consent, except the landowner in this place is the state, and through MARA is kind of devolving that level of consent to a holder. So that's a really important piece for people involved in the planning system at both sides of the transaction. Because a MAC is required in advance of planning, all of the environmental obligations in respect of that development are wrapped up into the planning process. And I suppose this is the fundamental difference between what we had seen operating under the foreshore regime, where there was this kind of parallel or dual consenting, whereby a lease might have had to go through a full level of environmental assessment, and then planning was required, and the same environmental assessment was required here. So we have a single pathway here. So there's no environmental decision making in respect of a MAC. It's a different type of construct. Similarly, there's no public consultation required at the MAC application stage. Consultation obviously is a key requirement of the planning process. MARA, we have a kind of a 90-day statutory limit to determine MAC applications, and we charge then for the holder the right to occupy the maritime space. We, in terms of assessing the applicant for the MAC, there's a kind of again new kind of terminology and concepts around the fit and proper person test effectively. So what MARA does and will do is effectively a due diligence on the applicant to ensure they're fit and proper to hold a maritime consent. That means they have the financial capability and capacity to carry out the project that they're committing to doing. That they have the technical expertise to do it, and effectively that they're not a rogue entity trying to occupy part of the maritime space as well. And that's a really important piece. And I suppose there's a bit of a transition in terms of what that means for both applicants and for the state as well, because it's a new process. But the positive thing about it, I suppose, that the maritime area consents is that a number of them live and exist and breed. They're available on the website. There's 6 or 7 consents that were granted by the Minister for the Environment and our specific transitional provision in the legislation. I have a link to that at the end of the presentation. But you can go online and you can look at what a MAC actually is. You can see what the maps show in terms of the area, the maritime area. People can see what the conditions are and the types of conditions that are attached to them. So a lot of the conditions are quite legalistic in terms of indemnity, insurance, bonds, that type of thing, to ensure that the state is getting the maximum benefit for the maritime area. But there are key milestones in the MAC as well, and one of the really important milestones is the requirements to apply for planning permission within a certain duration. So at those MACs that are out at the moment, the requirement on those holders is to apply for planning permission within 18 months of the date of grant. So they have to through the system. So the idea of the MAC is that it's not a consent that somebody can get and hoard and sit on for 5, 10, 15 years. The idea is that the consent is provided, but it's a kind of a use it or lose it type of scenario. And that's a really important piece in terms of keeping the system moving in it. As sure as I say that we require a maritime area consent to occupy parts of the maritime area, I'm going to give you the contradiction and the exceptions when a MAC is not required. And this is really important as well. It's just a feature of the system we live in, that not everything is covered by it. So what's not covered is really importantly, I suppose, that would be quite common around, would be activities relating to fishing and navigation. So fisheries, harbours, that's Killybegs up there. So development in there isn't covered by the MARA or the MAP Act. That's still dealt with under the Foreshore Act, and there's a few other exemptions there as well. Privately owned maritime area, which we don't think is too common, is another one. And oil or gas exploration obviously is dealt with under different VIRAs. But again, the exceptions to exceptions, there have been changes through this as we work through transitional provisions. And, I said, and I'm kind of contradicting myself, but the idea is that MACs are required prior to planning permission. There are a number of limited exceptions to that were brought about most recently by the Historic and Archaeological Heritage and Miscellaneous Provisions Act, which was only signed a number of weeks ago, which has introduced a kind of a limited time-bound transitional measures where certain projects had been granted planning permission but didn't have their kind of right to occupy consent for the maritime area. So it's kind of a mechanism to kind of rectify that and ensure that those projects can still move on. But they're very limited and very, very time-bound. But the key take-home message is for the future is MAC required before planning. This graphic, it just shows the kind of sequential in terms of the process for a nearshore development. The MAC would come through MARA, and then if successful, planning application goes into your coastal planning authority, and in the normal way, it would go through the coastal planning authority, be granted, refused, granted subject to conditions, etc. Importantly, if a MAC is refused, if MARA refuse a MAC or refuse an applicant to grant a MAC, there's no right of appeal in that respect, and that's just different to the planning system in that respect as well. And I suppose MARA would have enforcement around. We have ensure we kind of monitor conditions that would be attached to the MAC in this respect as well. So what type of maritime development would be kind of quite common, I suppose, in the nearshore area, and probably more people on this call will be probably a lot more familiar with this than myself, but we have marinas, kind of slipways, there's pontoons there, coastal flood defence, which we might see a lot more of, and obviously kind of piers and harbours for tourism, leisure, etc. So that's the type of development that you might see coming through. If that type of development and applications are coming through planning authorities, that requires a MAC prior to the planning process. We have other things like outfall pipes, cables, etc. That type of activity as well is covered in terms of the MAC. So that's the MAC piece. Look, it's a bit of a whistle stop, I admit, but I just want to move on to our other arm, I suppose, of the consenting briefly. And these are kind of usages, maritime usages, which have to be undertaken subject to a license. MARA is now the competent authority in respect of that particular process. The background images actually are just the types of activities we look at there, but things like maintenance dredging is one. A significant activity, I suppose, and volume of activity around it. The maritime area are kind of maritime surveys. Site investigation surveys, that's now competence for MARA. Things like maybe seaweed harvesting as well is in the legislation for us. We also have just recently commenced, I suppose, a process to include kind of one-off events, as we call them, so kind of recreational leisure type activities such as maybe horse racing on a beach, that would come into MARA as part of a licensable activity as well, and we'd have a process for moving that out through the system as well. So we have a number of usages there that would require a license, and hopefully that list could be expanded in terms of regulations, and we try to ensure that we kind of cooperate with other kind of maritime users and other kind of regulators in the area to make sure there's a joined up approach to the statutory approvals in kind of that respect. Just moving on to, I suppose, a key piece as we see it in MARA, and I've just put up in kind of italics there, is that the compliance and enforcement piece for us is really important. It kind of goes to the heart of our credibility. If we're to be taken seriously as an agency, we have to be serious about how we ensure that what we consent to is adhered to. And I suppose it's something that we're very conscious of. But it's important to state, I suppose, that we don't have a competence in terms of security, and that may be part of the conversation at the moment that's really valid actually and really live around the place in terms of cable security, defence security, all of that. But that's a matter for the security agencies. MARA may have a role in cooperation around that, but we don't have a competence in terms of security matters. But it's something that the state, I think, will need to be very conscious of when we see the types of development that might happen offshore, and how critical this infrastructure will be to the state in terms of energy security and supply effectively, and that we'll have to secure. So what do we enforce, and what do we can ensure that we monitor to enforce? Well, MARA will enforce the conditions of the MAC and ensure that they're adhered to, and enforcement in terms of any planning permission conditions that might be attached to a MAC through on board Planola. So the routes for the maritime area consent, and I probably should have put a slide on it, but if the application is for development consent in the outer maritime area, it goes straight to on board Planola. If it's in the near shore, it goes to the local authority. If it's a combination thereof, it would go to the board, effectively along the strategic infrastructure lines. But so we'll take on that enforcement role for the outer maritime area. So what's in the outer maritime area that we're really thinking of at the moment is kind of offshore wind farms and offshore wind infrastructure. The near shore is slightly different. So failure to comply with development permission can result in determination of a MAC and similar things like material breaches and that type of stuff. So really kind of significant enforcement powers in the legislation, which is kind of really important, I suppose, for the system as a whole to understand. And I suppose the job for MARA is to ensure that we have a geared up kind of enforcement arm to ensure we can monitor and comply and enforce effectively, and all of that is really important. So the probably added value piece, which I think is really important as well for us, is well, how can we in MARA not just be a consenting authority, which is a primary focus for us. We have to do our job, and we have to look after that. But it's about being the enabler piece. So what are we contributing, I suppose, to the wider system and trying to bring our kind of competence and experiences to that. So look, we've set out a high enough level prioritization piece, which kind of has come from kind of government priority really, and the drive to have MARA established pretty quickly was largely driven by the need for MARA to kind of take over the phase one special MACs, as we call them. These are the MACs granted by the Minister for the Environment for relevant offshore wind farm projects, predominantly along the east coast, but one is on the west coast, that we can manage those and take on those MACs. So we have that responsibility from establishment day, and I suppose part of that is ensuring that we're ensuring that the applicants, the holders of those MACs, are complying with the conditions in terms of timelines, etc. So allied to that, big space is the ORE piece, and look, Conor McCabe will probably speak a lot more to this, and there's a huge amount of really interesting work and really kind of transformative work going on in the marine planning space in respect of this, in terms of further kind of forward planning, more designated spatial planning around that for the ORE piece. And I suppose MARA's role is to kind of try to see how we can help in that and how we can influence and be an enabler of that. But on the day job, it's back to critical marine infrastructure to support, I suppose, the deployment of these projects. So ports are a real key piece of that jigsaw. And MARA has been focusing on ensuring our guidance and our MAC process is fit for purpose for ports to apply for a MAC if they require it, to ensure that they have the infrastructure necessary and ready for the deployment of offshore wind. So a lot of things working in a really important space. So MARA's role is key in that. I mentioned the exceptions earlier on, and ports are one slight exception. That again, there was a change to the legislation to allow ports engage in kind of pre-planning with the board without having a MAC. And that was to kind of improve timeframes as well. But again, it's a limited exception. So all this leads us to what we'd like to, maybe the ambition here for Ireland Inc., and this is kind of well stated in terms of what we'd like to see in terms of offshore. And maybe this is the vision, lovely calm seas. The reality is probably a little bit more different, but these are just, I suppose, an idea of some of the images around what we can maybe see and what we can expect in our maritime area in the future. Obviously, the offshore energy piece there, you have a substation offshore, you have huge infrastructure being deployed in a big space, I suppose, in our maritime area. So it's a big challenge, I suppose, for a system to wrap its head around how we manage that, how we deploy it, how we monitor it, and make sure everything is kind of compliant. So, but that is the ambition, I suppose, that we're set up to do. I mentioned the ports, and I suppose their kind of key role in all of this. And this is just to give you a sense of the size and the scale of infrastructure required, I suppose, to facilitate that.
Rory,
yeah.
you're on 25 minutes, Rory.
Great. I have about 2 slides left, so all good. Thanks, Terry. So this is one of the foundation pieces for offshore turbine. It's about 2,000 tons, and they require huge spaces in terms of port and strength of quay wall, etc., to kind of hold these things and move these things around. So the ambition, I suppose, for the planning system and for, I suppose, for the development system, the moral play a role in, is really significant, and it's a huge scale, and a scale, I suppose, that's sometimes has to be kind of seen to be believed. But that's maybe an idea of what we might expect to see at Irish ports at some point in the future, if this turns out to be a success. I won't read all of that, but that's a kind of our mission that we've kind of wrapped up a little bit in terms of all of this. Like to bring our expertise and knowledge to it. We have to do our job in terms of our consenting system, and we have to do our job in terms of enforcement. And that's our mission that we try to share with people. Like to leave people with homework, even though it's a bank holiday weekend, but we do have digital resources that I've called them here, but we have a lot of guidance on Mara's website, on our MAC license process. The phase 1 special MACs are out there. People can look at them and see what they're like. We have a consolidated piece of legislation. Yeah, as the legislation is changing a lot, it's constantly evolving, so there's a moving feast on that. But to keep up to date, there's a consolidated act, which is really good, and the new amendments to the heritage bill as well that bring it back in. But we're available at mara.gov.ie. Give us a follow as well on Twitter. And if people have questions, we're really happy to engage, really happy to get the message out there, really happy to play our part. So just on that, I'd like to just thank Terry and Sean for the invitation, and I hope people have found some bit of benefit to that half hour at lunchtime. Thanks, folks.
Thank you very much, Rory. Fabulous to see Mara being set up at such pace and getting to speed at such pace. I think people have found your presentation very interesting because there are a pile of questions have come in that we'll do our best to get to as many of them as we can. Juliet, if you want to start your presentation now. Juliet is an assistant principal officer in the Marine Planning Policy and Legislative Unit of the department. She's been working at that for the last 3 years. She was project manager in developing Ireland's first digital portal for marine spatial planning, together with the National Marine Planning Framework and a GIS representation of the activities taking place in the maritime area. Many of us will be familiar with the resulting portal, which is marineplan.ie, which is both nominated for a Civil Service Excellent Award and is also this year's winner, and very well-deserved winner, of the ESRI Ireland Customer Services Award for Mapping and Visualisation. So, Juliet.
Thanks, Terry. I'll just share now and hope this runs correctly. Okay. So, thank you for the opportunity to talk. So, as Terry mentioned, I'm going to talk to you today about how the NMPF developed into this portal that we have called marineplan.ie, and how it will assist, or hopefully will assist, in decision making for everyone in terms of maritime applications. Has it moved? I'm sorry, I'm not showing the next slide there. So the National Marine Planning Framework, as Rory has mentioned, so it's the long-term planning framework for how we use and protect and enjoy our seas out to 2040. It's a parallel to the National Planning Framework. It gives a sector-by-sector elaboration of the guiding objectives and the planning policies, and that's done through all the various chapters, not quite from A to Z, but from A to W, so from aquaculture to right through to wastewater. And it's a critical basis for the future decision-making by marine decision-makers who are obliged to implement the NMPF. Within the NMPF itself, the structure was done with the overarching marine planning policies, which apply to all proposals, and they're grouped into environmental, economic, and social, which are the sustainable development pillars. And then the sectoral marine planning policies, there's a list there. I won't go through them with you. But in total, throughout the NMPF, there's 92 policies that need to be referenced for the various different activities. 32 of those are to do with those overarching marine planning policies, and 60 are to do with the sectoral. There's also a large quantity of maps showing different activities and uses of the marine. So as we were developing the NMPF, we were very aware of the fact that once you produce the map and print it, that's it, it's static. So how do we enable people to see a more up-to-date version of that, or rather than having to open a book and look up a policy or something, how do we bring that to the forefront for people to see? And then also in terms of how do we get information out to the public, so there's transparency in the activities that are going on and the activities that are already there. So we came up with the idea to create a marine plan. So this is just to show you the kind of the amount of maps that there are and the various different areas that they cover. So like I said, it's quite a lot for people to go through. So that is definitely the reason that we decided creating a digital portal was the way to go. So this is just to show you on the portal where we were talking about those overarching marine planning policies. So it's done here, as I said, in environmental, economic, and social. And each of these are cards that you can click. And I'm going to do a live demonstration through the website to show you all of this. And then underneath that are the key sectoral activities or policies. So there's 12 cards there, but energy then is subdivided further down. So this is the home screen for Marine Plan. And what we have done within it as well is where we can, we've hyperlinked everything for you. So to make it easier to find information. So if you want to find the digital copy of the National Marine Planning Framework, the PDF version, you can go to marineplan.ie, you can click on the booklet itself here, the National Marine Planning Framework, and it'll open up details about it. There's a couple of areas within it that say you can read the National Marine Planning Framework here, and for further information, click here. And then the arrows down the bottom, it's where we've linked in Marine Institute and Ireland's Open Data Portal. So that'll link you straight into those also. And then the footer, we have hyperlinked our email so that you can contact us on msp@housing.gov.ie at any time. And our Twitter handle is there as well. You'll also see in the footer, we have the Maritime Area Planning Act. So that'll bring you straight into the written version of the legislation. A link to the Project Ireland 2040 page and the National Planning Framework, and then a link just to the department's website itself over on the right-hand side. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to bring over the, hopefully this will work for everybody now. I'm going to bring over the actual website, and I have a couple of pages open here, and we'll just do a live demo of this now. So like I said, this is the home page. If I, you'll see the little hand comes up. If I click over onto the various different areas that I've explained, that link, hyperlink in for you to open those things. So you can click here and it'll open it up in a new page for you for the Marine Institute. So I just need to get this one out of the way, sorry. So the home page has various different activities on it. If you click in on the activities map, you will see there are actually 138 different data layers that are under this when we first brought it out. There are more layers being added as we go. The idea with this is that if you have to make a decision on something, if you have an application, or if you just have an interest in something, that you're able to click on the map and find the different various areas. Here I've just opened up the boundaries map. So all the other layers are done in the chapters, and then we've put the boundaries at the bottom. So you can turn on and off various different layers within that by just clicking on the eye icon. So if I just zoom out here, you'll see we have the EEZ, which Ali was shown last week as well, which goes like very far out. And then you can turn off your EEZ and you'll see the currently designated continental shelf boundary as well. If we turn that off, you can see what's left there, and that's the National Marine Planning Framework. So that's the designation that goes right out for Mara that Rory was talking about. And then as you zoom in, there are a couple of different layers that we've added into this. So the high water mark, the low water mark, and the 0 to 80 meter depth, which is being done in 5 meter intervals, which is very useful depending on the type of activity you want to do. And you can see here that on the south coast, the water goes out. It's much shallower here, and you can see that that's why the first sort of DMAP proposal is out there in that south coast, because there's an awful lot more space. Also, the east side, where a lot of the current applications are for wind farms and where the Arklow Bank would be, again, because of the depth, because when you go onto the west of Ireland, you kind of drop off the shelf fairly quickly as to what the limitation is for fixed offshore at the moment. You can turn off any layer that you want, and you can also coincided with other layers. So if I turn on here, protected marine sites, they'll overlap with that. And you can see the various different elements within them. And if I just have to move this down again, sorry. Ali also mentioned last week, you know, how important it is to know what the substrate is. So that is actually also included under seafloor and water column integrity, and the chapters of the NMPF cover this as well, which is why those maps are included. But you can also click on an area and it will give you a little bit of information about that particular sediment or whatever it is that's in there, if you just click over on the area itself. And then as well as the layers, what we have is a legend. So if you go into legend, it will show you what all those different, so seabed substrate here, it told you whether it's coarse, mixed, mud to muddy, etc. And so depending on what layer you turn on or off, the legend will change for you for that layer. So if I turn off seafloor water column integrity and go back in here, you can see there's nothing except the National Marine Planning Framework area on. And there has slowly come up and told you what that substrate is. There's so many layers in that one, it takes a bit of time for it to go through. Some of the other layers that we have, so we start, like I said, the way the chapters go. So we've aquaculture, biodiversity, climate change, defence and security. So Rory mentioned that. So it's very important that we are able to show where those almost no-go areas are, or certainly no go without any major discussion with Department of Defence. And then there's the Hobel Line Naval Base down in Cork. So the firing ranges are shown here. So you can overlay those if you wanted to have a look at the current designated offshore renewable sectors, and the DMAP, we have those on there. So again, like that, if I go into the legend, it shows you these are the particular areas that are turned on. And you can turn those on or off as you desire. Another one that is useful depending on what you're looking at is we have a world ocean base map. So if you turn that on, you get what some people are more used to seeing, which is the blue, but it can be quite distracting depending on the colors that are on the different layers. So by default, we have it off. The only default one we have on is the National Marine Planning Framework area that's there. In terms of those boundaries, we have been working on that 3 nautical mile limit. So there's a very rough sort of boundary that has been done on it, but again, it has to be divided between all of the administrative areas for the local authorities, so that the work on that has to be done within those administrative areas. So we will be in discussion with that when that is complete and ready. So sorry, this sharing screen is dropping down on me on the line. So that's the activities maps. You can go through many of those yourself as you want to, or come back to us with any questions. And all of the data that's in those maps is available, and I'll run through that at the end for you. So I give you a kind of screenshot of this initially. So this is the overarching marine planning policies. So like I said, you can click into any of the cards on this, and it opens up a subset of cards below that. When you click in on one of those subcards, it will give you the policies from the NMPF. So this is very important. It's an easy way for you to get to read those policies in relation to the subject matter that they're on. It gives you a little small paragraph about what that particular subject is, so environmental ocean health in this case. And there's no web map associated with ocean health. But if we go back one and we go to biodiversity, so there's 4 policies for biodiversity, and all 4 will show for you here, and you can just click in between them to read them, and they will change. And then the layers for biodiversity, so as well as seeing them on the activities, you can actually see them on the activities map, as well as seeing them here within the activity. And again, you have the option, the legend mark goes with the layers for you. You have the option of turning on or off everything, or individually, or overlaying particular ones, and zooming in and out. I will say also that we have a development which hopefully will be published next month, which gives you these map screens in a larger size. So the layers and the legend will be embedded into the map screen, and you'll also be able to make it full screen. So it's much easier to see, because that is quite a small screen depending on what it is that you want to work on. So again, just like I was showing you earlier, if you want to see a particular information about this, so the metadata on it, this shows you the grey seal distribution. It shows you it was last updated in 2019. shows you the most relevant policies that are on that. And then there's a metadata link for that. So if you click on view here, it'll bring you out to the source of that data. In this case, it's seal distribution. So it gives you a bit of the information on it there. And again, gives you all the details, and you can download directly from there. And it tells you that it's National Parks and Wildlife Services is the contact for that. If we go back, you can go back to various different areas from the heading here. So that'll bring you back into the overarching marine planning policies. And again, you can go into different areas on them there, or you can go back to the top level of activities and you can go into the key sectoral areas. So if we click into aquaculture, it's the same thing. The policies will come up and the layers and the legend will come up on that, and you can click on and off anything that you want. And if there are some supporting resources on anything, we have those linked in at the bottom there as well, where we felt they were relevant in terms of they are either in the NMPF as relevant, or they are something that's relevant to that particular activity. And I mentioned energy is further subdivided. So each of these categories, once you click into it, you're getting the details on it. Energy is further subdivided into 4 categories. And then once you click in below that, it will bring you in to, again, give you the details. So you can see offshore renewable has 11 policies. So there's a number of different policies within the NMPF, sorry. And this is just like that, a handy way of getting to see what policy relates to that activity without having to have the big book or whatever it is in front of you. And again, the details are here of those layers that relate to that particular activity. So you have 2 different ways of seeing the maps on these. In relation to the policies map, then this is another kind of mapped area. So this will show you there are 9 spatially specific policies, and then the rest apply to all areas of Ireland. So they're listed as plan area policies. What you can do here in the spatially specific area, you can click the draw tool here. You can draw your area of interest, and that will change the spatially specific policies that come up to show you what's specific for that particular area that you have just drawn. So here it's changed from the 9 to a fisheries, a heritage, an ORE, and a ports and harbours. So you know all those activities are taking place in that particular area of interest. Again, you can click on the policy itself and it will bring up the wording of that policy for you. So you can read it within this area. You don't have to go back. And if you click more info, what it does is, because I'm after clicking the fisheries policy here, if I click more info, it'll bring me to that card within the activities page, which is about the fisheries. So then you can get to all the policies that are related to fisheries, and you can get to all of the layers. So we're trying to link in everything as much as we can, make it as user friendly, that you can get to the same information that you want at all times. I'll go to the MSP hub in a moment. I'll just explain here this little kind of burger menu. So this is the other sort of user-friendly addition that we've put in. So when you click on that, instead of going in and out through various chapters, you can actually drop down directly into whatever it is that you want. So just click economic policies here and it just brings you straight into that. If I click on it here and I go down to MSP hub, it'll bring us here into the MSP hub. So that's just a nice, quick, handy way instead of clicking between all of up here. If you're not sure, or if you know exactly where it is that you want to go, just go click on the burger menu and it'll bring you in there. So the MSP hub is embedded into this. So what we have here on the first one is this information page. So within the NMPF, we also have all of the bodies that are listed that have activities in the maritime area or responsibilities for activities in the maritime area. So if you click in here to view, this will bring up a page and everything within here is hyperlinked. So aquaculture, defence and security, energy, natural gas, it's done in the chapters of the NMPF. There's the lead department, which you click on, will bring you to their website and the functional responsibilities that they have and some information on that. So again, these are all hyperlinks. They click you into the area. So we take Defence Department, Defence as the Naval Service. If I click that, it's going to bring you off into the Naval Services site. And I'll just go back to the hub here. Sorry, no. It's just playing up now because I'm on camera. So if we go back into the hub, I'll just show you some of the other things that we have linked in. So instead of giving you homework, we want to try and do the homework for you, or at least get you a start on it. So we have in here forward planning in the maritime area. So if you click into this, it'll discuss a little bit what forward planning in the maritime area is. The Maritime Area Planning Act, again, like I showed you earlier, it is there in the footer for the actual act, but this also gives you an explanation about the Maritime Area Planning Act. Sometimes a little bit more information on it, which is helpful, and then also links you into the Act itself. The Seafood ORE engagement is something that this department is involved in, and that's the booklet that they came up with. So we have that in there for you also. And then this one, our plan is the Green Schools competition. We last one was 2021. We have a competition running this year, 2023. So this is a great one for the kids. Brings you in and shows you some of the posters that they did, the winning posters. I'll go into that one in a second to show you now. And then the last one is Project Marine newsletter. So I wanted to highlight the fact that we do have Project Marine newsletters. We are on I think our 5th one at the moment. So if you ever want to get a copy of those, they're linked in here on Marine Plan, and you can also email MSP and we will send them on to you. So the Green Schools, I'll just go back to that one. The idea of the Green Schools is to try and bring the children along. So we want to develop their interest in all things maritime, not just necessarily maritime spatial planning, but in everything to do with the ocean and climate change and all of that. So this is the competition that we had in 2021. And you can see it's not done in your formal way, it's done in a much more child-friendly way. And we had 1,200 poster entries and 85 3D models from the schools. Now, this year's one, there's even more schools actually in this year's one. So we'll have the details of that up on at the end of this year when the awards ceremony and stuff has taken place. So we also made the map something that they're more used to seeing. And the links here, just you can click in on them and it'll open up either the poster or the model of the winning schools for these. And then we just kind of say, what is marine spatial planning about? And we do it in a child-friendly way. And then these are the posters of the for the winning schools and the various different age groups that they were in. And then just a quick one, just in terms of MSP usage. So that's this actual website usage. So last year, if the figures will come up in this, last year we had about 2,000 hits is all, because it was very new and it wasn't really out there and it wasn't being used. And it's not actually being, it's not a system that people use on an everyday, day-to-day basis. So the figures wouldn't be what you'd be, of a system that's in use. But even just for up to now, this year, there's been almost 24,000 hits, up from like 2,000 in just, that 1 year. So I think that shows like that it is actually being used and appreciated, hopefully, by people to help them in their work. So I'm just going to run through the slides here again, just a refresher for you of what's there, and so that after this event you'll have the slides, you'll be able to find your way through the website again, and just to make sure I didn't miss out anything when I was talking to you about them. So I went through this with you. This is the activities map. Again, you can turn on and off any layers that you want. Click on the layers and then click on the legend, and it shows you the legend for that particular layer. Click in on any activity and it'll pop up, will come up and show you about the details. So yeah, this is to show you that the layers and the legend are there, and that you can overlay various different activities. So here we have the marine areas that have been consented, sitting on top of the heritage assets, which are all of those lovely green dots, are all the shipwrecks around Ireland, and the UNESCO Global Geopark. So these are things you need to consider when you're looking at an application and how you can overlay the various different ones. And then the South Coast ORED map proposal, that's the newest layer that's on. And like I said, we'll be putting the 3 nautical mile one up hopefully fairly shortly. I went through the cards with you. So each of the overarching marine planning policies has a second level of cards below it for you to dip into the information. Each of those cards shows you a paragraph about the system and the policies, and then where there is a map associated with those policies are there, and every policy is listed. You can go in and out of them. Every layer can be turned on or off. Yeah, the legend shows you what color each layer represents. And then I went through on the policies map for you that you could draw an area of interest and see which policies apply. And then the policies will change for each one that you click. Each policy can also be clicked from the right hand, from the list there, and they'll pop out on the right hand side for ease of reading. And then if you click the more info, again, it'll bring you back into the cards. And then this is just one to remind you that the MSP hub is there for any information you want to get. Go and click on the hub. And the burger menu, a quick way of getting around the website without having to click in and out. So then just some last points from me to wrap up. So some key points to note in terms of marineplan.ie, all the data on it is open data. It is available for download. The data itself is downloadable from data.gov.ie or from the department's own open data, data.housing.gov.ie.open data, blah, blah. That one, it's all linked there for you, and they're all hyperlinked as well. The data is catalogued and certified by the Marine Institute before being uploaded. So the Marine Institute were instrumental in getting all that data together for the NMPF, and I have to say thank you to them for that again. But then they were also instrumental in making those paper maps, PDFs, into actual digital maps for us to be able to put on Marine Plan. And then we worked with Esri Ireland to develop the actual site itself as well. Additional data sets will be added over time, and hopefully we'll be at a kind of quarterly or a more frequently update depending on that data. And if other people out there have recommendations of data that should be up there, certainly send us an email to msp@housing.gov.ie. So then the hub has the latest kind of updates, newsletters, education pieces for schools, etc., and information on all the departments and agencies with a marine function. So it's a handy resource to go to. And just some kind of key points then for everybody is that for us, the ease of finding the relevant information is key to making good decisions. One source of truth or information is important. So to have that let's say data developed and be able to pull services rather than everybody having individual bits of data, so that there's one area with that data and everybody can pull it as a service and it's all up to date, and to identify the right data and make it available to all. So that's what we're doing in terms of transparency, etc. We want to ensure that the data is out there both for the public and for decision makers. Lastly, and thanks to Terry, she mentioned our lovely awards. So I'm just going to say we were delighted to see that all our efforts had been recognised, and we won Customer Success Award for Mapping and Visualisation. And then that's our gorgeous little Marine Plan things there we have there. And this is just, like I said, to plug the newsletter again. So we're on issue number 5. If you want the hard copy, it'll be posted out to you, or if you want the digital version, just email MSP. We do have a list of about 800 people we send it out to, but if you're not on that list, email us and we'll get you on the list, no problem. And finally, just to say thank you, thanks to Terry and Sean for asking me to give this presentation, and our website and all our contact details are linked there for you. And questions?
Thank you very much, Juliet. Thank